Well, hello everyone. Been a while since I've posted something. Janice's son Larry had a bit of bad luck. Ran over, I think he said it was a chunk of manifold the other night, and proceeded to rather severely hit the oil pan, which put a hole in it. And unfortunately, it also smashed it in quite deeply, thereby leaving the oil pump broken. Which at first I didn't think was too bad of a deal. The oil pan sits right there. Only had to take off one plastic shroud. But unfortunately, while the 4 bolts are easy to get to, or 3 bolts, the drive for the oil pump drives off of the same system that the cam chain drives off of, which is underneath the timing cover, chain cover. And the chain appears to also have to be timed correctly. It's got multicolored links that have to be in the right place for whatever reason. Hence, what would have been a nice little 1-hour job, I went over and got some instructions on how to do it from a friend of mine. And if you had it done in the shop, it's a little over 14 hours, they say. So I'm going to fix it. I mean, even at a economical rate of $100 an hour, it would be quite expensive to take somewhere. So we'll see what I run into. To be continued. Well, as always, you start by getting all the stuff out of the thing. Get this cover off to where you can see it. Good. Something I did back when I was doing the body work and had to pull the motors out of the front wheel cars. Take a little thing of white paint and dab it on all the connections with dots. One for the wire, one for where it goes, and 2, and so on and so on. My brother put me onto these double hinge needle nose pliers. I have found them to be quite handy since I've got them. And here's our first look at all the stuff I gotta get out of there to get that timing cover off. I've already taken the motor mount off for access. Got a ratchet strap underneath holding it up, and got to get the alternator sort of out of the way, and eventually looks like we're going to have to take the air conditioning off, or at least move it out of the way. So we got to take the valve cover off. This is kind of always a little scary moment. It uncovers a whole bunch of delicate things up underneath there. Now, with a great big handful of bolts taken off, lots of wires and clips and connectors, let's see if we can lift this thing out of here. Take the water pump off. It's due to lack of being able to see what's going on there, turned into a little more aggravation than I would have liked. And get the pump off, but The housing had radiator hoses and heater hoses that you'll see were a little bit tricky to get to come off of the vehicle. And I'm trying to line up the timing marks. I thought that would be a good place to start. As it turned out, it didn't make much difference because my whole plan on this operation was to be very careful about the cam timing chain and keeping all of that in place so I wouldn't have to be concerned about getting the two cams back in phase. As it turned out, it didn't work out the way I'd hoped. Got the crankshaft pulley bolt off. I had no idea whether the pulley was pressed on or a slip fit, so I'm kind of trying to sneak up on it here. And it turned out it was a slip fit. See, we had 2 screwdrivers and it come off of there without any extra grief. And here I'm breaking all the bolts loose by hand for a couple of reasons. One, it gives me a feel for how tight they were. And another is the electric battery ratchets that I have are, one's Harbor Freight, the other one's a good one, but it's a 1/4 inch, so I don't want to stress my tool any more than necessary. So far I can give the little Harbor Freight 3/8 ratchet a positive review. I've been real pleased with it. It's got good torque and so far no issues, so it seems to be a pretty good tool. Kind of a moment of truth. Pry the front timing chain cover loose. Make sure everything's all been disconnected, and hopefully there's enough room to slide it past everything underneath that I can either get it to come out the top or sneak it out the bottom. And here's the chance to use a tool that I had bought and only used once on my truck to change its at that time I think 18-year-old radiator hoses and heater hoses. It's a clamp compressor that you can reach up in there where there's no room and swing the tabs on the spring clamps that hold the hoses on. So I'm always glad to use a tool that I had bought and only used once, and had it in the box and it worked out again. And as predicted, the air conditioning pump has got to be gotten out of the way. It's hiding access to the radiator hose and both heater hoses. And here's a view of the spring clamps that hold those heater hoses on, and it shows how valuable that little tool is. And here just shows that just because I had the tool doesn't mean that it's still easy. Those hoses were stuck on there for quite a while and took a lot of tricks to get her to break loose. And as it turned out the bottom was the solution to get that cover off. I gotta say, that was a big project to get access. And here's the gear that drives the oil pump. You can kind of just make out some of the yellow links that are on there keeping everything in time. This is the cam chain that drives both cams, which now is very loose since the tensioner was in that cover. And there's the orange tensioner for the oil shaft or the oil pump chain. The gear drive for the pump is keyed, so I took some small yellow zip ties and zip tied the chain to the gear. That way it has to be in time when I get the put up, because nothing has been moved as far as the teeth related to the chain. And that part worked out really good. And I have to remove the ratchet strap because it's going right across the oil pickup. That's the part that's broken. So it's clear. Take out the 3 bolts and we'll remove the offending part. And then basically from this point forward is put it all back together. Flat that goes into the drive gear that will keep everything in time since I locked the chain down. So stitch this thing back up in there. It actually fits in pretty good. Finagle around with the pump shaft to get it to line up with the flat spot in the gear and bolt her up. About here, my worst fear kind of came to play as I'm trying to get the nut tight on the oil pump gear shaft and kind of manipulating the chains around, keeping everything I thought in place. I heard a little snap, and what that snap was the spring tension on the left-hand cam looking at the motor from this direction. Had let the cam jump, and now the cams are no longer in time. So while I don't show it on the video, I spent probably 3 hours searching YouTube videos to see what's involved on timing these motors with if you would replace the timing chain, and there were several, fortunately, and I never take just one to do it. I wanted to make sure if I found multiple videos showed the same process, I did it, and I finally came up with a plan. It was tedious because I didn't want to disturb it any more than I had to, but it had to be done, and of course if you get it wrong you can really mess up a motor. So I got it in, got them in place. Now I'm putting what they call an anaerobic sealer. It doesn't set up until there's no air, so it stays on there, and then when you bolt it together real tight, there's no air and it sets up. Pretty good stuff. I've used it on the Cobra quite a bit. So I've got both sides lubed up, or not lubed up, but sealed up with the sealer. Let's see if we can fish this thing up in here without getting the sealer all over me or all off of the car. And I was able to sneak it in. With raising the motor up, it gave me a little more room because it angled down before, and get it. And in the process of timing the chains, trying to get them, if you notice this wrench sticking up here, it's stuck onto one of the cam that kept jumping, and so I hooked it on there and pulled a little tension and then zip tied it down to the intake manifold, and that kept it in place so that until I could get the cam chain tensioner back in. So I wished I had come up with that a little quicker. I think I had maybe 3 different times of messing with it before I finally came up with that, because I'd get it just where I'd want it and then it would jump. So I got everything bolted together, it's put into place, and the process for the cam tensioner is you turn the motor backwards after you get it all back together, and it gets in there and it pushes a little thing, and then the tensioner goes pop or snap. Sounded almost the same as when the cam jumped. And then I put everything in. So here's the oil pan with its damage. The thing costs $100, but it is steel, so I figured that there shouldn't be any big deal. I'll take my time here and beat it into place. I've got a little sandbag underneath it that I made out of one of Nicole's old purses and filled it full of sand, and it seems to work. So get this thing beat in. Trying to take the, as they say, the last part of the damage in, you take out first. And it was quite stretched, which I think kind of come back to haunt me a little later. My intentions were to get it all beat into place, because when you get it right, the split will line up quite nicely and look. Of course, with being stretched, there's a little extra metal. And as you'll see here a little bit, it kind of interfered with my welding process. Here I'm doing a little heating and shrinking, moving some of the stretched metal back where it needs to be. I got a dolly set up there using it as an anvil. And we'll beat this thing out to where it looks like something. Got it all shaped back in. Looks pretty good. There's no gaps in the crack. But I think what happened is I thought that this was a painted oil pan, but I think it was powder coated. And as I'm cleaning the metal here, preparing for welding, I think some of that metal got overlapped where the seam was, and it had a little bit of that powder coat still in it. Because as we'll see here in a little bit, the welding process, while the welds look good, when I tested them, there it is before welding. As you can see, it fits quite nicely. But as I said, when I tested the weld, I took a blowgun underneath and blew it and sprayed soap or water on it, and I kept coming up with some porosity which left little pinholes. Here's my newest toy. Bought me an inexpensive TIG welder. I've always wanted to mess with one. And I figured this would be a fine time to use it and make me look really good on YouTube. And while the welds look good, as I said, that porosity was causing me all sorts of grief. And what I thought would increase the odds of it being a really nice airtight weld, I welded both sides. And as I'm still learning with the TIG, it was a little bit, but I kept running troubles. Well, as I said, with the testing, as you can see here, spraying air underneath, it still had the little bitty pinholes, little bubbles. So I said, well, to heck with it, I'll just braze it. So I brazed over my TIG welds. And while I got it, what I thought would do it, the porosity came back to haunt me there. So here, I ended up just using my old body skills, and I tinned it and soldered it up. And as is the norm nowadays on the cars, there's no gasket, so liberal application of silicone sealer. Get all the bolts back in it and get the top all tightened up, all the plugs back in with my little white dots to show me where they go. And this is pretty much it. I got her done, got all the plastic shields in underneath. That was the challenge. And while I don't have a video here of it actually running, it started right up, so all of my hours of research on the cam timing worked and got Larry back on the road. So hope you enjoyed this, and we'll catch you next time.